I love it all. And I remember when you casually dropped into our conversation that, yeah, I have a podcast. I'm like, I need to know more about that. And so for me, even just exploring some of your topics, like things like, good enough parenting, which, oh my goodness, like who talks about that? I mean, I feel like it became a posture for me in order to survive as a parent, especially early days, to topics like what if burnout is more than exhaustion? And just as I listened to those episodes and to your guests who you center in some of those conversations, there was just so much that personally resonated. And I think the part that I really appreciated and perhaps felt a connection in terms of the ways we're both choosing to show up in the world and to offer our gifts to the universe is really to kind of accentuate the power of that relationship between awareness, choice, and connection. And I really want to acknowledge one of my associates that I get to play with in my equity work, Kale Black, because that's something he's always talking about. But really curious about for you when you hear that, where does your heart and your mind and your spirit go?
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad that it resonated with you. I feel like the self-awareness piece is something that I'm really passionate about. I think it was something that I think I helped people with a lot during practice. When I was in practice, that was something that I noticed. If people were able to be self aware, they would be more empowered with choice and they would be more empowered to stick to proactive healthcare versus reactive healthcare. And that extends into life, right? When we're more aware of ourselves, we can be proactive about everything. So you mentioned good enough parenting. One of the things I'm passionate about is recognizing that parenting's really hard. It's a very big exercise in dealing with your own emotions. But when you're self-aware, you can kind of separate what's your emotion versus what's your kid's emotion. And it empowers you and gives you a little bit more direction into showing up as the person or the parent that you want to be.
Oh, love that. And really, again, I wish I had access to your episodes when in the early days of being a parent.
Me too.
I love it. I love it. Like so much innovation, I think, comes from like we're like, what could have helped me in the times where I really needed? And I really love that about like it shows in the way that you curate your conversations. I think there's a space that has been a vacuum, and so I feel like you're really filling that, and just looking forward to staying connected to the conversations that will still come in addition to what you've already the episodes that already exist. And I think about another place I go as I was listening through to some of your episodes was this idea of um, and I'm gonna lift up the work of the Resilience Toolkit in Kem and Defo, Devika Shankar. I've had the privilege of listening to some of their conversations, and this idea of resilience as a personal strength or weakness, and that to treat adversity like also like it's well, if we just meditated a little bit more, maybe we would have handled the racism at work that much better, for example, right? And that how do we hold um, what I consider resilience moves. Like sometimes, like some of the things that you talk about in your episode are like, okay, like that. I think it was Patricia was talking about like my child had Timbits and potato wedges for breakfast. I'm like, listen, it's a resilience move sometimes to just, it's good enough, get going, that idea. And so I think as I was listening to some of your episodes, it just made me think about that idea of how do we encourage self-care. It's not about that spiritual bypassing, in that whole space. So, what comes up for you as you hear that?
Yeah, the resilience piece is a really interesting one because I feel like we're navigating that as a society too, right? There's so many traumas, there's so many issues that are happening in the world, and we're having to rise up as a society globally, but also as an individual. And I feel like, especially with these conversations around race, around diversity, around moving from one place to another. I'm really aware that my parents were immigrants, but I was born here in Canada and raised here. So, we're navigating differently. And so they had a resilience that, I wonder sometimes if I had been born 5 years ago, how would I have turned out? Would I have had the same kind of resilience in a different way? And because they were so resilient and they were able to manage all the struggles that they had to go through, I was afforded a better life, a better opportunity. But interestingly, I think about how I've been able to have the privilege to, manage my mental health and take care of myself and ask questions that they didn't really have either the luxury to ask or the knowledge or the opportunity to ask those questions. And so I think there's different kinds of resilience that's coming up for different people in different ways. And how do we encourage that? I think a lot of it is to have an open dialogue. That's really what I think I'm about. That's sort of the through line of all of my work, whether it was about hormones. It's funny, my daughter, I have two daughters, and they don't want to talk about anything hormone related. And I laugh because I used to do YouTube videos back when I was in clinical practice, and I talk about everything. I'm like, you will talk about, because in South Asian culture, it's taboo, right? We're not allowed to ask these questions. So I'm really about open conversation. And now I talk to them about mental health, and I talk to them about moods and emotions and things that we're struggling with, and things that I think my parents' generation really didn't talk about, and or didn't have the opportunity or space to talk about. And I think that really builds resilience when you can ask those questions and have those conversations in an open and safe environment.